What if I told you that one of the biggest problems in modern education is that we've been treating students like t-shirts? That probably sounds strange. After all, students aren't products, they're people. But I think this metaphor reveals a hidden assumption behind many educational systems today. This is Gian narrating for One Life Only Counseling Services. And in this video, I want to introduce a word that I believe deserves to be part of everyone's vocabulary. That word is reductionism. Reductionism is the tendency to treat something wonderfully complex as though it were much simpler than it really is. And I believe it quietly shapes not only education, but many aspects of modern society. So let me begin with a simple question. What do t-shirts and schools have in common? Let's start with something familiar. Think about how t-shirts are made. Small, medium, large, every shirt follows the same pattern. The same measurements, the same production line, the same quality control process. Factories are designed to produce consistency, uniformity, predictability. And that's exactly what we want from a factory. When you buy a medium-sized shirt today, you expect it to fit almost exactly like the medium-sized shirt you bought last year. That's what makes factories so effective. They produce standardized products efficiently and reliably. But now, let me ask another question. What happens if we begin applying that same way of thinking to human beings? Now, imagine taking that same production model and applying it to human beings. Everyone starts school at roughly the same age. Everyone studies almost the same subjects. Everyone takes the same examinations or completes the same term papers. Everyone is expected to graduate after roughly the same number of years. And those who don't fit the standard timetable are often seen as falling behind. Now, I'm not saying these practices are necessarily wrong. Schools need structure, they need organization, they need standards, but notice something interesting. The logic is remarkably similar to what we see in a factory. The assumption is that if everyone follows the same process, they should arrive at roughly the same destination. But human beings aren't manufactured products. They don't all learn the same way. They don't all develop at the same pace, and they certainly don't all thrive under the same conditions. So the question isn't whether schools need standards. The question is this. What happens when we begin treating students as though they were products moving through an assembly line? So what do we call this way of thinking? Reductionism. Reductionism is the habit of treating something wonderfully complex as though it were much simpler than it really is. Now, reductionism isn't always a bad thing. Scientists reduce complex systems to study them. Doctors focus on specific organs to understand disease. Engineers simplify problems to design better machines. Reductionism becomes a problem when we forget that our simplified model isn't the whole person. When we begin believing that grades tell us everything about a student, or that a diagnosis tells us everything about a patient, or that a personality label tells us everything about a partner, we stop seeing the complexity that makes people human. That's the danger of reductionism. Now, what does reductionism look like in education? It happens when we begin reducing a student to a few measurable numbers, like grades, test scores, class rankings, academic performance. Now, these measures aren't useless. They tell us something important, but they don't tell us everything. A report card can tell us how well a student performed on certain academic tasks, but it cannot tell us how kind that student is, how resilient they are, how curious they are, how creative they are, or how much they've grown after overcoming adversity. Those are real parts of a person's development, yet they rarely appear on a report card. The problem isn't measurement. The problem begins when we mistake what is measurable for what matters most. Now, don't misunderstand me. Schools need standards. Assessment isn't the problem. Standards help us organize learning, measure progress, and ensure that students develop important knowledge and skills. The problem begins when standardization becomes our model of what a human being is. Human beings are not products rolling off an assembly line. They are continually developing, changing, adapting, and responding to the circumstances around them. Some flourish early, others flourish much later. Some learn best by reading, others by doing. Some struggle because of trauma, others because of poverty, others simply because they're developing at a different pace. None of these differences make someone less capable. They simply remind us that people grow under different conditions. If education is about developing human potential, then perhaps our challenge isn't to make every student fit the same pathway. Perhaps it's to help each student find the conditions under which they can flourish. So the next time you see a report card or a test score or a class ranking, remember that you're looking at one small part of a much larger human story. Measurement has its place, standards have their place, but education should never confuse what is easy to measure with what matters most. Human beings are not products rolling off an assembly line. They are continually developing within context. And perhaps our role as educators isn't simply to ask whether students fit the system, but whether the system helps students flourish. Because better explanations create better solutions. And when we stop treating students like t-shirts, we make room for understanding, growth, and human potential. And to end this discussion, let me remind you that people are not t-shirts. Perhaps education shouldn't be about making everyone come out the same, but about helping people discover the conditions under which they can flourish. Again, I'm Gian, and I've been your narrator for One Life Only Counseling Services. Thank you for watching. There is only one life, so make it your own.